Hello, welcome to Chapter 22, Water Pollution. Overview, no notes here. Types of water pollution. First, knowing what water pollution is, whether it's physical or chemical. Physical would be sediments. Chemical would be DDT, as we've discussed in class, or water from processes from industry would be filled with chemicals. 8 categories we're going to study: sewage, disease-causing agents, sediment, inorganic plant and algal nutrients, organic compounds, inorganic chemicals, radioactive substances, and thermal pollution. Much of this is going to be review for you because we have already discussed these in other chapters, some pertaining to water, others pertaining to other things that we've studied. First one we're going to talk about is sewage. 2 environmental problems: enrichment and increase in biological oxygen demand. Enrichment basically means that there's fertilizer going into the body of water. Well, that's nitrogen and phosphorus. We learned that when we looked at the Mississippi watershed, the nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, sewage, where does the nitrogen and phosphorus come from? Bodily functions. Proteins and nucleic acids contain nitrogen and phosphorus. You have nitrogen and phosphorus in you, so it is going to come out through urine and through fecal matter. So that causes this enrichment process to start. Extra nutrients, algal bloom, increase in decomposers, takes us down to increase in biological oxygen demand. So the increase there decreases the DO, or the dissolved oxygen, available for other inhabitants of the ecosystem, and squeezes some of those inhabitants out. Okay. The whole process that we're talking about is eutrophication. This is a graph of eutrophication. Once you look at ground zero, if you look at 0, that's where we're having the sewage spill. And before, if you will, look at the dissolved oxygen levels, then notice as biological oxygen demand increases very, very rapidly with this, we get fish kills. Then as the effluent, which is the sewage, moves downstream, then we get an area where dissolved BOD starts to drop dramatically, and then dissolved oxygen goes up to previous levels. As BOD goes down, and there's not such a drain on dissolved oxygen, then those levels are going to be up, or more availability of oxygen to the ecosystem. And that is because the sewage is becoming diluted. Okay. We're looking here at an oligotrophic lake, which is a clean, good, healthy lake. These are the characteristics of that clean, healthy lake: low nutrient level, light penetration, high dissolved oxygen, deep waters, low algal growth, and biodiversity. You're looking here at fish species that are oxygen lovers. They're fast movers. They need a lot of oxygen. Okay. Notice low nutrient levels. There's still nutrients in there. There has to be. You've got organic matter from plants to fish. So you're going to have some nutrient in there, but it's not going to be overpowering. A eutrophic lake looks like this. No, you're not looking at a golf course over on the left-hand side of the screen. That is a lake, and it's covered with algae. When excessive nutrients get into a water ecosystem, the algae will bloom or grow very rapidly because there's plenty of fertilizer. There's plenty of, if you will, vitamins for the algae to grow. Algae has a life cycle. Algae dies, and aerobic bacteria decompose the algae, and the aerobic bacteria utilize all of the oxygen. So that gets you in an oxygen deprivation situation. Now, over time, this is what happens to that oligotrophic lake, is it becomes a eutrophic lake. Increased nutrient levels, poor light penetration, low dissolved oxygen, shallow waters because you've had excessive decomposition, and that decomposed matter is going to return to dust or dirt, soil, and it will start to layer on the bottom, therefore keeping your waters more shallow than normal. This is also potentially going to increase the temperatures of the water, which exacerbates the low dissolved oxygen problem. You have more microbes because of algal blooms, and you have more shallow water, which warmer water does not hold as much oxygen liter per liter. Notice here too, we've lost biodiversity here. What we have here, we're showing 3 different species, but all of these species are bottom dwellers, they're scavengers, slow movers, so we don't have any fish that require a lot of oxygen, so our whole ecosystem has changed. Before I get into disease causing, and bacteria is one issue, which is disease causing in water, but sewage can put bacteria into the water itself. You have bacteria in your gut, and that's what breaks down your food so that it becomes available in your bloodstream. And when that gets out, or animals' fecal matter gets out into water, that can cause a bacteriological issue, covering bacteria in disease agents, but you need to be aware that that can come from sewage. Now, an overlying factor, any, or I should say most, waterborne illness will present symptoms: stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, and fever. So that is very indicative of waterborne diseases. Now, not such a big deal for you. You're going to go to the doctor, you're going to go to the hospital, get some IV fluids, get your stomach settled down, and maybe if it is a bacteria, you might get some antibiotics to get you through it. This is a different issue in areas where people are poverty-stricken and they do not have access to medical care. This can be a killer for young children or old people, people who are very vulnerable. So we have a list of different infectious agents, diseases that they cause. We've got bacteria and viruses both here, also some protists as well, and also you can get pathogens such, or such as parasitic organisms, such as worms. Flukes are very common in water, and they travel through the bloodstream, can get into your liver and wreak havoc on your body. So they can cause issues as well. And I'll just let you look those over. Oops, sorry. In class we talked about polio and how polio has been eradicated in the United States because we have vaccines. What you're looking at here is how your drinking water is tested and how the beaches are tested, areas that we boat in. And this is called a Chpt, or it formerly called a fecal coliform test. Your water provider will go out every week, different areas in the service system, and get a water sample. They'll take it back to the lab. Everything is sterile. The bottle that they collected is sterile. Nobody's hands touch it. And they push it through this filter paper, then put the filter paper into a sterilized petri dish. Now that petri dish is like the ones we use in class, but ours are plastic, and these happen to be glass, so they can use them over again and guarantee their sterilization. So they put that in there and leave it for 24 hours. That's about what it takes to grow. Now, on the right-hand side, that's bacterial colonies that have grown. That is not water you drink. If that many bacterial colonies are present, you had better not be drinking that water. Drinking water should have less than 1 bacterial colony. So not necessarily would be 0, but you wouldn't be able to have a colony large enough to cover up an entire square. So that is less than 1. So you can have a little bacteria, but most of the time, because we do feed chlorine here, you're not going to see any bacteria. Swimming and boating. When you go to the beach, that water's been tested. The lifeguards test it for bacteria, and the state tests it for bacteria. They will close the beach sometimes because of high bacterial contamination. It just is. Sometimes it's from birds, sometimes it's from fish. Normally it is not from human sewage. However, it could be, but not from water systems. Our sewage is completely contained, and most of the systems in South Florida cannot even put their clean effluent into the ocean anymore. Some still have permits, but most do not. So, we looked at sewage, we looked at diseases, now we're looking at sediment. We have talked about sediments since the beginning of school, really. So, you understand the process of erosion, what causes erosion, which is everything's gone over here. And then, what does sediment pollution do? Well, limits light penetration. So, what's the big deal? It's a little dark in the water. Lack of photosynthesis, lack of producers should be coming to mind. That limits the food chain. That limits dissolved oxygen. Covers aquatic animals and plants. Well, if it covers the plant does not have leaf surface area in which to photosynthesize. And if it covers animals, say like a fish's gills, and gills are where the oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged, they're not going to be able to breathe very well. If it covers skin of amphibians, amphibians will not be able to breathe very well because a lot of them breathe through their skin. Also, water, because it is polar, because it does dissolve many solutes, then toxins get into these waterways via the sediment. The in the sediment gets into the water, and then the water holds on or attaches to the toxin. This is looking at the beautiful oligotrophic aquatic system, and this is one that's filled with dirt. Notice something on the bottom, that if this sediment is an issue day in, day out for a very long time, look at the characteristics of the bottom, how they've changed. Now, you've read the article about Indian River Lagoon, and I just want you to remember Lake Worth Lagoon, which is just east on Southern. Basically, they had this problem with sediments. Not just sediment from dirt getting in the water, but also eutrophication. And the sediments then covered up rock areas that were pristine for oysters to attach and to create good places for breeding grounds and living. And people last summer donated their time and went out there and helped construct new oyster beds so the oysters wouldn't be living in the mud. Okay, inorganic plant and algal nutrients. Again, this is nitrogen and phosphorus. Like we saw with the sewage, how increased nutrients, this is the same thing. We've got an increased rate of eutrophication. First we start with enrichment, we start with the algal bloom, then microbial action starts to take place to break up that algae. That's where the bad odor comes from, because as these guys metabolize, a lot of them will put off waste gases. Some can be sulfur, some can be methane, and then we have a very large oxygen demand, or biological oxygen demand. This is going to be the end of part 1. We will pick up part 2 with the next